Hi friends, Shannon here, creative crew member for Scrappiness, and today we're going to do some ink blending on colored cardstock. The products I'm going to use are the Easter Wishes and a bushel of bunnies. We're going to use 3 bunnies and the 3 cottontails. We're actually going to make 4 bunnies. The Hippity Hoppity Sentiments, Stitched Hills, we use the center hill, and the Scene Builder 6x6 stencil. And I'll show you, this is my favorite stencil, my most used stencil, because I love creating scene cards. So we'll also use a piece of pink cardstock. I've already used the Stitch Hills to cut a piece of black cardstock. I'm going to cut the bunnies out of some really dark purple cardstock and the bunny tails out of gray. I know it sounds like a weird combination, but stick with me and you'll see where I'm going with this. I'm going to use Distress ink in Saltwater Taffy, Chipped Sapphire, and Black Soot. And we're going to start with the Saltwater Taffy and our stencil here. And we will start from... Okay, so there's slots in the Scene Builder die. And what you do is you just inch your cardstock in there where you want to ink blend your border on. So we're going to start, please excuse my band-aid, I have a cut on my finger again. I'm having a rough February for sure. Okay, with the Saltwater Taffy and a blending brush, I'm going to ink up our cloud pattern here. So I'm going to ink up my brush, tap it off on the lid, and then I'm going to bring that ink just above or below that stencil border. Kind of swirl it around. Whoops. Kind of moved my stencil or my paper. Get that back in position. There we go. Ink it up some more. And just bringing that color just slightly beyond the stencil. So we'll get a nice cloud scene. Now I'm going to move my stencil. Oops. It poked up through the other side. I need to keep it below the stencil. So I'm going to move the stencil over so that we get a different cloud configuration. Oh, there we go, just a little bit more. There we go. Ink up my blending brush and repeat. Make sure I hold onto my paper so it doesn't move. Usually my stencil mat will hold onto my paper, but sometimes I think I get a little too confident in it and it'll move when I'm blending the ink on there. So, and then I'm going to take that out and I'm going to put it under a different cloud configuration, and we'll do it a little this way. There we go. And tap my ink off onto the stencil instead of on the lid, so I can just grab that ink and blend it onto the paper. And the Saltwater Taffy ink is just a little bit darker than my cardstock. So it's starting out to look kind of monochromatic, but we're going to bring in the Chipped Sapphire and the Black Soot to deepen up the color to make it look more like a sunset scene or a sunrise scene. Let's see, where's my clouds? I want to kind of angle it a little bit. There we go. So I just moved my stencil so I can do another cloud configuration. Ink up my brush and bring that ink just above, or I'm sorry, below the stencil, creating the cloud image, or clouds image. I think we should do 1 or 2 more. Ink up my brush again, tap, tap, tap. And I think that'll be good. Let me check my hillside. Yeah, my hillside will cover up the bottom clouds. Okay, so with the remaining ink on the brush, I'm just going to come in and blend this just a little bit over the center. Deepen that just a little bit. There we go. So we're done with the saltwater taffy. Next we're going to use chipped sapphire. And the reason I'm using the chipped sapphire is because the pink and the blue of the chipped sapphire, the pink of the cardstock and the blue of the chipped sapphire will create purple. And that's what I'm going for. So I'm going to line this up with my stencil again, but I'm going to bring the stencil just beyond the previously stenciled border, so it'll give like a shadow effect. Hold my paper still and ink up my blending brush. Tap this off a little bit on here. And then on the top ones, I'm going to go all the way over. But as we get further down the cardstock, I'm going to do just the outside edges. And it'll make sense as I move further down. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so this one, whoops, can't do this with my blending brush in my hand. Okay, so that's where it lines up, and we're going to put it just beyond so it'll create a little shadow. Tap, tap, tap. Tap some of that ink off, and then blend just beyond that stencil. Okay, now we're going to move up to the next one, and I think we're over here on this side, and we're going to push it up just a little bit farther. And now I'm going to just do the sides of the cardstock. So I'm going to tap off here and just do a little bit on this side and then a little bit on this side. And stick with me till the end to see how we finish this up. I'm trying to create kind of a shine that will be our faux sunrise or sunset, depending on how you want to look at it. So I'm trying to push this up just beyond. I can't do that with my blending brush in my hand. Okay, just beyond the already stencil, the pink stenciling. And then again, tap, tap, just on the sides. And then one more. I need to move my stencil down so I have room to, let's see, where does this go? Right about there. And then push it up just a little bit. Tap, tap. And then just the sides. I think this portion might be already covered by the hillside, but we can shorten our hill if I feel like I need to. Okay, now I'm going to remove the stencil, and we're going to ink blend with the remaining ink, create an arch, and that will create the faux sunrise right here. Oh, I think I inked that up a little too heavy. I don't want too much ink. And see how the blue ink is creating, as it absorbs more into the paper, it will become more purple. It looks a little blue now. It will become more purple when that dye ink soaks into the paper. There we go. And then we're going to darken that up with some black soot, distress ink. Ink up my brush, and the black soot, we're not going to bring that as far over. We'll leave this area a little blue, but up probably about half of the area, half of the blue area will cover in black soot. There we go. Now if you're curious, what I'll do is we'll have that ground come up a little bit lower, probably right about here. And then we'll put the bunnies on the hill. I'm going to clean this up and I'll be right back. So now I've treated my black cardstock with anti-static powder, and I've got my sentiment laid out on top of it, and I'm just going to pick it up with the lid to my stamp positioner. Then we will ink that up with some Versamark ink, because we are going to do some white heat embossing of the sentiment onto our hillside. And I also left it high enough so I can trim some of the excess off of the bottom after I adhered the hillside to the card base. So I'm just going to give that some pressure, and we're going to do that again. I like to do it either 2 or 3 times, depending on, usually it depends on whether I get a good stamped image the first time or not. And this time I did, so I think twice is enough. Huh. Okay, and I'm going to bring in a piece of scratch paper, if I can get that, with my white embossing powder. And this is ultra fine or super fine, one of the two. Extremely fine white embossing powder. How about that? Just sprinkle some on, then tap the excess off. And it looks like we got some good coverage there. Couple of little strays. Okay, and then I'm going to use my heat tool to melt the embossing powder. I'm going to let that cool down, and I'm going to stamp it again since my embossing isn't very solid. You can see the black cardstock through the sentiment, which the sentiment reads, "Hippity hoppity, Easter's on its way." Very, very cute. I'm making this card for my great-granddaughters. And we're going to stamp it again with the Versamark ink. Ink up my stamp. And give it a press. One more time for good measure. There we go. Set those aside. Bring in our embossing powder again. Flick off the strays. Okay, heat it one more time. Much better. So we have our 4 bunnies, and now we're going to add their little cottontails. And because since the hillside is in black, I wanted the silhouettes of the bunnies to be a different color, because if I were to have black silhouettes of the bunnies, you wouldn't be able to see the difference between the bunnies and the hillside. And since their tails would be probably lighter than their body, in my imagination, I cut them out of gray cardstock. So I'm just adhering them to the back of the bunnies. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack them too high, so to give them a little bit of dimension from the bunnies, so they appear more dimensional than the flatness of the bunny bodies. So I just line it up with the one that I previously laid down. So they're stacked too high. Oops, it didn't stick. There we go, one more. And now we'll add the hillside with the sentiment to our card base. Some liquid glue. Make sure my corners have enough glue on them. I don't want my corners to come up. So then I'm going to line that up with the edges of the paper. I didn't put enough glue on them to glue on it to have it slide, so I don't want it so high. I'm just going to put it so it covers up that bottom layer of clouds. There we go. Give that a press. And then we'll glue down our bunnies. I'm going to do 2 on each side of the hillside. Going to finish the bunnies off with a couple of white highlights from my white paint pen. There we go. So I'm just going to put a couple of highlights on their ears. And I think we'll add a couple of dots on their tail also, or tails. And there you go, our sunset Easter card, or sunrise Easter card, whichever way you look at it. Thanks for joining me today. Links to all of the products I used to create this card are located in the description box below. I'd appreciate a thumbs up if you enjoy our content and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.